We're going to talk about protection and participation. Protection, there are three types. There are buffers, barriers, and principal protected notes, which are 100% guaranteed. Either issuer guaranteed, which is subject to the credit of the issuing bank, or FDIC insured, which is backed by the government. Now, a buffer is permanent protection by absorbing an initial loss up to a certain percentage. If we would use the term a 20% buffer, that would cover the first 20% loss. If the asset that the structured note is based on is down 15% at maturity and it has a 20% buffer, you would get 100% of your principal back. The underlying asset was down 25%, you would lose the difference between 20 and 25, so down 5%. This is in contrast to a barrier. A barrier protection is contingent. A 30% barrier, all losses up to 30% would be covered by the note. So if you were down 25% on the underlying with a 30% barrier, you get 100% of your principal back. A 30% barrier, but a 35% loss in the underlier, you would actually lose 35% of your money. That is why I call it contingent. A graph shows the principal protected note, which is the green line, and we can see it never falls below zero. The buffer, we can see once the underlying asset's down 20%, then you start losing money. The barrier note, once you hit that 30%, you start losing as if you were short the asset on its own. A 50% loss is a 50% loss in the barrier note. The buffer note would be a 30% loss, and the principal protected would be zero loss. The note's return is calculated as a multiple of the market's return. We have an absolute return, which we explained. If the market is negative, you can get a positive return based on the market performance. The step-in, which has a minimum gain under predefined circumstances, usually if the market is, or the underlying asset is positive at maturity, you get that stepped-in rate. And we have caps where there's a maximum amount that you can earn. And I have another graph. I'd like to start off with the participation multiplier. All these notes have that 30% barrier protection, right? So the green line has a participation multiplier where you could see the note actually outperforms everything else because the multiplier is 150%, right? As opposed to 100% for if you were long the underlying index, right? Then we can go to the absolute return, which its participation multiplier is just 100%, but it's absolute, meaning that you'll get positive returns if the underlying index is negative. Now, it is subject to that barrier. So once we hit that barrier, the gains all disappear and you start losing money. But you can see you get gains on both sides that are equivalent. And to also introduce the cap function, we have the blue line where in return for the cap, you also get a 200% multiplier. So that's why the capped line is higher when we're below that cap level of 30%. It's above the green and the blue, but then it also straightens out as does with the absolute return note. The maturity is usually between 1 and 5 years, and the maturity is how long the note lasts, like a bond. Now, typically, the longer the maturity, the more favorable the protection and participation is on the note. There are some notes that can mature early, and we briefly touched on that, and that's because these notes are callable. Now, when they're callable and the note no longer exists and your principal and your profits are paid out to you. Now, there are two different types of callable notes. One is auto callable. The other is called issue callable, meaning the issuer decides on the observation date, a predetermined time, if they want to call the note